The wind on Halcyon did not just blow. It scoured. It was a relentless abrasive force that carried the taste of oxidized iron and the memory of 1,000,000 years of geological resentment. Inside the pressure seal of Outpost Halcyon, the wind was a distant, vibrating drone, a constant reminder that outside the reinforced titanium walls, the universe was actively trying to kill anything soft enough to bleed. Rhett Calder wiped a smear of grease from his cheek, leaving a darker streak on his already grimy skin. He was currently deep inside the bowels of the primary atmospheric cycler, a machine that wheezed and rattled like a dying man with a chest full of fluid. "Come on, you old rusted bucket," Rhett muttered, tapping the pressure gauge with the handle of his hydrospanner. "Just give me 3 more months. Just 3 months of clean oxygen, and then I will requisition a replacement that Commander Priest will definitely deny." The gauge flickered, the needle jumping from 80% efficiency to 85. "Good enough," he whispered. Rhett climbed out of the maintenance shaft, his knees popping audibly. At 38 years old, he felt closer to 60. It was not the physical labor that aged him. It was the weight of the things he carried in his head. To the 20 souls stationed on Halcyon, Rhett was just the maintenance engineer, who doubled as the field medic because he had steady hands and knew how to stitch a laceration. He was the guy who fixed the toilets and the torn suits. They did not know he was the architect. They did not know that the lines of code running the atmospheric cycler were child's play compared to the algorithm he had written 10 years ago, the Harmony Grid. It was supposed to be a defensive energy distribution network, a shield to balance the volatile border sectors. But the general's men with ribbons on their chests and voids in their souls had taken his code and inverted the polarity. They had turned his shield into a hammer. 4,312 Valari civilians. That was the number. It was not a statistic to Rhett. It was a head count of ghosts that followed him into the shower, sat with him in the mess hall, and hovered over his bunk when the lights went out. He had run as far as he could to this dustball moon, orbiting a gas giant in the forgotten arm of the galaxy. Halcyon was the edge of the map, a place where people went to be forgotten. "Calder," a voice crackled over the intercom. It was Lieutenant Miller, the comms officer. "Sensors are picking up a geomagnetic spike in Sector 7. The commander wants eyes on it. Since you are the only one who fixed the rover's suspension, you are up." Rhett sighed, wiping his hands on a rag. "On my way, Miller. Tell the commander I will bring him back a nice rock for his collection. Just check the spike, Calder, and try not to break the rover again." The surface of Halcyon was a landscape of bruised purples and ochres. 2 moons hung low in the sky, one pale and cratered the other, a swirling marble of toxic gases. Rhett drove the rover, a 6-wheeled beast called the Mule, over the shifting dunes. The suspension he had rebuilt groaned in protest, but it held. He preferred the surface. Out here, the static in his head was drowned out by the visual isolation. It was just him, the sand, and the radiation shielding of the cockpit. "Sector 7, Rhett said to the empty cab. "Middle of nowhere adjacent to the middle of nowhere." The sensor console pinged, a rhythmic, urgent sound. Rhett frowned, tapping the display. "That is not a magnetic anomaly." He crested a high dune and slammed on the brakes. The mule skidded, throwing up a curtain of sand before coming to a halt. Down in the valley, something was burning. It was not a meteor. Meteors did not leave a debris field of twisted composite metal and leaking coolant. A long furrow had been gouged into the valley floor, ending in a crumpled mass of dark, iridescent metal that smoked against the twilight sky. "Halcyon, this is Rover 1, Rhett keyed his mic. "I have a crash site, Sector 7. Looks like a small craft. Static. Nothing but the angry hiss of white noise." Rhett looked up. The aurora borealis above was raging a curtain of green and violent violet. A solar storm. It had scrambled long-range comms. He was cut off. "Perfect," he muttered. Just perfect. He could turn back. He could drive to the outpost, report it in person, and let the security team handle it. That was the protocol. That was the safe, responsible thing to do. But the smoke was turning black, suggesting an electrical fire near a power core. If there was anyone alive in there, they did not have the hour it would take for Rhett to drive back and return with a squad. Rhett grabbed his medical kit, and his helmet sealed his suit, and cycled the airlock. The wind hit him like a physical blow. He leaned into it, trudging down the slope toward the crash. As he got closer, the design of the craft became undeniable. It lacked the blocky utilitarian aesthetic of human coalition ships. It was sleek, curved, almost organic, like a teardrop forged from obsidian and starlight. Valerie. Rhett's heart hammered against his ribs. The enemy. The species his code had decimated. He reached the hull. It was hot enough to trigger the thermal warnings on his HUD. He found the emergency release lever concealed beneath a panel that had been partially melted away. The symbols etched into the metal were flowing, elegant scripts he recognized from intelligence briefings a lifetime ago. "Okay," Rhett grunted, gripping the lever. "Let us see who you are." He pulled. The mechanism groaned, sparks showering onto his visor, and then the canopy blew off with a hiss of escaping atmosphere. Rhett looked inside and forgot to breathe. She was wedged into the pilot's seat, the restraint webbing cutting into her armor. And it was armor, a ceremonial, terrifyingly beautiful battle plate that looked like it had been grown rather than forged. It was scorched, now cracked in places, revealing the biosuit underneath. She was Valerie. Her skin was the color of polished bronze in the dim light, shimmering with a faint metallic iridescence. Her ears, long and tapered, were swept back against a skull that was slightly more elongated than a human's. Even unconscious, with blood, dark violet blood streaking her face, she radiated a sense of dangerous lethality. She was not a civilian. She was high caste, a warrior. Rhett's medical scanner whirred, projecting a holographic display over her chest. Subject, Valerie, female. Vital signs, critical. Lung collapses in the right quadrant. Internal hemorrhaging. Suit life support failing. "You are dying," Rhett said, his voice sounding tinny in his own helmet. He stood at the precipice of a decision. Protocol demanded he secure the site and wait. If he brought her in, she was a prisoner of war. The Coalition intelligence officers would descend on Halcyon within 2 days. They would patch her up just enough to interrogate her. They would pick her brain apart to find fleet movements and codes. She would be a trophy. And he, the architect of the silencer, would be the one handing her over. "No," Rhett said. The word was swallowed by the wind. "Not again." He reached in, his knife flashing as he cut the restraints. She slumped forward, dead weight. He caught her grunting under the unexpected mass. Valerie bone density was 30% higher than humans. "Okay, Your Highness," he strained, dragging her out of the cockpit. "We are doing this the stupid way." He hauled her up the dune. It was a nightmare of physical exertion. Every step was a battle against the sliding sand and her dead weight. By the time he reached the rover, his lungs were burning and his suit's cooling system was screaming in protest. He cycled the rover's airlock, dumping her onto the floor of the cargo hold. He stripped off his helmet, gasping for air, and immediately knelt beside her. He needed to stabilize her before the drive back. He popped a seal on her neck armor, exposing the pulse point. It was thready, fluttering like a trapped bird. "Do not die on me," he commanded, injecting a dose of broad-spectrum coagulant into her neck. "I am not explaining a corpse to the commander." He wrestled her into the passenger seat, reclining it all the way back, and threw a heavy thermal tarp over her, concealing the distinctive alien armor. The drive back was a blur of adrenaline and rehearsed lies. When the lights of Outpost Halcyon appeared on the horizon, Rhett had his story straight. He pulled up to the rear maintenance bay, bypassing the main vehicle depot. The guard on duty, a kid named Jenkins, who spent too much time playing virtual poker, wandered over, squinting against the dust. "Hey, Calder," Jenkins said, eyeing the rover. "You catch that anomaly?" "Just a sensor ghost," Rhett lied, his voice flat and bored. But the vibration shook loose the intake manifold I had in the back. I need to get it to my workshop before the seals degrade. It is sensitive to temperature shifts. Jenkins looked at the bulky shape covered by the tarp in the passenger seat. That is a big manifold. Need a hand? No. Rhett snapped, then forced a tired smile. No, it is delicate calibration gear. I do not want anyone else liable if it cracks. I have got a trolley. Go back to your game, Jenkins. I saw you were down 50 credits last night. Jenkins grinned sheepishly. Right. See you, Calder. Rhett waited until the bay doors hissed shut behind him. He was sweating profusely, and it had nothing to do with the heat. He loaded the manifold, the unconscious alien warrior, onto a hovering cargo pallet and pushed it through the labyrinthine corridors of the lower levels. He avoided the cameras he knew were blind spots. He had been the one to, accidentally, misalign them months ago for privacy. He reached his quarters at the end of a dead-end hallway near the engine room. It was noisy here, vibrating with the hum of the reactor, which meant no one liked to visit. He shoved the pallet inside, locked the door, and engaged the manual override on the lock. Safe, he exhaled, sliding down the wall for a moment. You are insane, Rhett. You are absolutely certifiably insane. He looked at the woman on the pallet. She had not moved. The pool of violet blood on the tarp was growing. Okay, he said, pushing himself up. Let us see if Valeri physiology is as tough as the propaganda says. His cabin was a cramped square of space dominated by a narrow bunk, a desk cluttered with half-repaired circuit boards, and a small hygiene unit. He lifted her onto his bed. The stark white sheets were instantly stained purple. Rhett went to work. He had to strip the armor to treat the wounds. It was a puzzle of interlocking plates and magnetic seals. His hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as he worked the mechanisms. Under the armor, she wore a black biomesh bodysuit that had fused to her skin in places where the heat had been intense. He had to cut it away. Sorry, he muttered, peeling back the fabric from her side. This is going to hurt. A jagged shard of metal, likely from the console, was embedded just below her ribs. Rhett sterilized his instruments. He poured a generous amount of disinfectant. Over the wound, the alcohol content was high enough to kill a horse. Her body jerked. A low, guttural sound escaped her throat, but she did not wake. I know, Rhett soothed, gripping the shard with forceps. On the count of 3. 1, 2. He pulled on 2. The shard came free with a wet suck. Blood welled up dark and viscous. Rhett immediately clamped the wound, applying a biofoam patch that sizzled as it knit the tissue together. He worked for 2 hours, cleaning burns, stitching lacerations, and monitoring her erratic heartbeat on his portable scanner. He was bandaging her shoulder when her hand shot out. It was fast, blurringly fast for someone half dead. Her fingers, long and strong, clamped around his wrist. Her grip was like a vice. Rhett froze. Easy, he whispered. I am a friend. Well, I am not an enemy right now. Her eyes opened. They were not human eyes. The sclera was dark, the irises a burning luminous gold with slit pupils that dilated wildly as she tried to focus. She looked at him, but Rhett had the feeling she was looking through him, seeing something else entirely. She whispered something. The language was melodic, full of rolling R's and soft vowels. Vera Nashka Eltar Rhett did not speak Valari. He knew technical terms, weapon designations, and kill zones. He did not know poetry or prayers. But he knew the look in her eyes. It was the look of a soldier who thought they were dying alone in the dark. He did not pull his hand away. Instead, he squeezed her fingers back a firm, grounding grip. Stay with me, warrior, he said softly. You do not get to die today. The golden eyes widened slightly, the slit pupils rounding out. Her grip tightened for a second, painful and desperate, and then she went limp, her eyes rolling back as unconsciousness claimed her again. Rhett sat there for a long time, his wrist throbbing where she had grabbed him. He did not know, that in the high dialect of the Valari battlecastes, the phrase Nashka Eltar meant witness my end. And he did not know that by clasping her hand and commanding her to stay, he had unknowingly completed the answering couplet of a ritual as old as her species. He thought he was just being a medic. He gently placed her hand back on her chest. "Great," he sighed, rubbing his face. "Now, where am I going to sleep?" The next 3 days were a haze of caffeine and subterfuge. Rhett lived a double life. During the Alpha shift, he was the grumpy engineer, unclogging waste recyclers and arguing with the quartermaster about inventory shortages. He walked the corridors of Halcyon with his toolkit, nodding to crewmates, all while his heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Every time Commander Priest looked at him, Rhett expected the accusation. "We know about the alien in your room, Calder." But Priest only complained about the temperature in his office. "I am working on it, Commander," Rhett said, standing in Priest's office, trying not to look as exhausted as he felt. "The thermal couplings in the lower deck are shot. I have had to reroute the coolant flow. That is why I have locked down the corridor near my quarters. Open pipes, hazardous fumes. Safety protocol." Priest, a man whose face looked like it was made of bread dough, waved a dismissive hand. "Just fix it, Calder, and submit the Form 33B for the parts usage." "Yes, sir. Form 33B, will do." Rhett escaped the office and headed straight for the mess hall, grabbing 2 nutrient packs and a bottle of water. He shoved them into his pockets and hurried back to the lower deck. Inside his cabin, the air smelled of antiseptic and copper. The Valeri woman Saris, he reminded himself, though, he did not know where he had gotten the name from. Perhaps a whisper in her delirium was still unconscious. But she was healing. The bruising on her iridescent skin was fading from a sickly black to a lighter purple. Her breathing had deepened, losing the terrified hitch it had on the first night. Rhett had moved his mattress to the floor for her, taking the uncomfortable metal chair for himself. He spent his off hours changing her dressings and scanning her vitals. He found himself talking to her. It was a way to fill the silence to keep the ghosts at bay. "You know," he said on the second evening, dipping a cloth in cool water to wipe the sweat from her forehead. "You picked a terrible place to crash. Halcyon is the armpit of the sector. We do not even have real coffee. We drink this sludge that tastes like burnt dirt." She did not answer, but her ear twitched slightly at the sound of his voice. "I used to live on Terra Prime," he continued, wringing out the cloth. "Sky cities. Clouds that were actually white, not yellow. I had a nice apartment. A cat. I was important." He stopped, his hand hovering over her face. "I was dangerous," he corrected himself quietly. "I wrote things that hurt people. I bet you know about the silence of Sector 4. Yeah, that was my masterpiece." He looked at her calm, alien face. It was strange how peaceful she looked. In the propaganda videos, Valerie were monsters. Razor-toothed savages who ate human babies. But here asleep, she just looked tired. The lines around her eyes spoke of stress, not malice. "I am sorry," he whispered, "for everything." On the third night, exhaustion finally won. Rhett had just finished a 12-hour shift repairing a hull breach on the cargo bay. His muscles were jelly. He stumbled into his cabin, locked the door, and checked on his patient. Her fever had broken. Her skin felt cool to the touch, smooth like polished stone. "Good," he mumbled. "You are tough. I like that." He sat in the chair, intending to just rest his eyes for 5 minutes. He leaned his head back against the metal wall, folded his arms, and was instantly asleep. He did not dream of the ghosts that night. He dreamed of golden eyes and a voice that sounded like wind chimes in a storm. He woke up with a start. The silence in the room had changed. It was heavier, charged. Rhett blinked, his neck stiff. The cabin was dim, lit only by the emergency strip along the floor and the glowing display of his computer terminal. He looked at the mattress on the floor. It was empty. Adrenaline flooded his system, cold and sharp. He scrambled to his feet, reaching for the heavy hydrospanner he kept on the desk as a makeshift weapon. "Do not," a voice said. It came from his bed, the actual bunk bolted to the wall, not the mattress on the floor. Rhett spun around. She was sitting there. She had pulled herself up from the floor and was perched on the edge of his bunk, her back pressed against the wall. She was wearing one of his oversized gray t-shirts which hung off her lean frame like a tent. Her legs were bare, long and muscled, covered in the white biopatches he had applied. Her eyes were open clear and locked onto him. They glowed in the semi-darkness, two burning coins of predatory intelligence. Her long ears were swiveled forward, catching every ragged breath he took. She looked weak, trembling slightly with the effort of sitting upright, but the hand resting on her knee was curled into a claw. Rhett lowered the wrench slowly. He realized how ridiculous he must look, hair sticking up in every direction, grease on his face, holding a plumbing tool against a highly trained alien commando. "Hi," Rhett said. It was the stupidest thing he could have possibly said. The Volari woman tilted her head slightly. The movement was avian sharp and curious. "Hi," she repeated. Her voice was raspier than he expected, dry from days of disuse, but her English was flawless. It carried an accent, a lilt that made the vowels sound longer, more musical. Rhett cleared his throat. "I see you are up. That is good. Healing, rapidly." "Where am I?" she asked. Her gaze darted around the room, taking in the cluttered desk, the dirty jumpsuit in the corner, the half-eaten nutrient bar. "Outpost Halcyon," Rhett said. "Human Coalition territory. You crashed 3 days ago." She looked down at her hands, flexing her fingers. She touched the bandage on her side. "You treated me," she stated. It was not a question. "I did. I am Rhett Calder. I am the maintenance guy. And the medic. Mostly the maintenance guy." She looked back at him. The intensity of her stare was unnerving. She was assessing him, calculating threat levels, escape routes, and weapon availability in the span of a heartbeat. "I am Saris," she said slowly. "Saris," Rhett repeated, testing the name. "I think you told me that. Or whispered it. When you were bleeding out on my floor." "I did not think I would wake up," Saris said. She looked at the hydrospanner he had placed on the desk. "I expected a cell. Or an interrogation chair." She gestured vaguely around the cramped, messy cabin, with a hand that still trembled with fatigue. "And yet," she said, a dry, humorless smile, touching the corner of her mouth, revealing the tips of sharp canines. "This is clearly not a medical bay." Rhett rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the heat rise in his cheeks. "Yeah, about that. The medbay has cameras, and reports, and mandatory notifications to Fleet Command. My cabin just has bad ventilation and a lock that I control." Saris stared at him for a long moment. The golden light in her eyes seemed to dim, slightly softening into something akin to confusion. "You hid me," she said. "I hid you," Rhett agreed. "Why?" Rhett looked at his hands. They were scarred, stained with grease, the hands of a mechanic. But under the skin, they were the hands that had typed the code for the silence. He looked up at her. "Because I was tired of burying people," he said simply. "And you looked like you had more fight left in you." Saris studied him. For a second, the tension in the room broke. She uncurled her hand from her knee. "I have a great deal of fight left, Rhett Calder," she said. She leaned back against the wall, exhaustion washing over her face again. "But right now I would settle for water." Rhett let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. He grabbed a bottle of water from his stash, cracked the seal, and handed it to her. "Water," he said. "That I can do." She took the bottle, her fingers brushing his. The contact was electric, a reminder of the strange moment 3 days ago. She drank deeply, watching him over the rim of the bottle. The escape pod was buried in the sand. The commander was asleep in his quarters. And inside the smallest room on the base, Rhett Calder was sharing a drink with the enemy. "So," Rhett said, sitting back down in his chair. "Welcome to Halcyon. Try not to kill anyone." Saris lowered the bottle, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "No promises human," she said. "But for you, I might make an exception." Outside, the wind howled against the hull, but for the first time in 10 years, the silence inside Rhett's head was gone. It had been replaced by the breathing of the warrior on his bed. The air in the cabin had changed. For 3 years, the space had smelled of ozone, stale recycled oxygen, and the bitter tang of industrial solvent. Now, after 2 weeks of cohabitation, it smelled of something else. It smelled of copper, and something spicy, like electric storms, and crushed cinnamon. It smelled of Ceres. Living with a Valeri battle daughter in a space the size of a prisoner transport cell required a logistical ballet that Rhett Calder had never rehearsed. "You are pacing," Rhett said, not looking up from the circuit board he was soldering at his desk. "I am patrolling the perimeter," Ceres corrected. She moved with a fluid, predatory grace that made the cramped quarters feel even smaller. 3 steps to the bulkhead. Turn. 3 steps to the hygiene unit. Turn. It is insufficient. "It is hiding," Rhett countered. "And if you patrol any louder, Lieutenant Miller in the room below is going to think I am learning to tap dance." Ceres paused by the bed. She was wearing another one of his shirts, a faded black one, that said Orbital Maintenance Union on the back. It was absurdly large on her, yet she managed to make it look like ceremonial robes. Her injuries were healing at a rate that defied human biology. The purple bruising had faded to a faint lavender shadow, and her movement was sharp, devoid of the hesitation of pain. "I should not be hiding," she said, her golden eyes narrowing. "I should be commandeering a vessel. I should be returning to the fleet." Rhett put down his soldering iron. "We went over this. The solar storm has fried the long-range comms. There are no ships leaving Halcyon until the interference clears. And if you walk out that door, Commander Priest puts you in a containment brig and calls intelligence. You become a bargaining chip. Is that what a battle daughter wants to be traded for a mining concession?" The Ceres went still. The mention of being a trade object hit a nerve. She sat down on the edge of the bunk, her posture rigid. "No," she said softly. "I have been a chip on a table long enough." Rhett watched her. They had established a strange, fragile truce. During the day, while Rhett worked his shifts fixing the failing lungs of the station, Ceres remained a ghost in his room. She slept, she meditated, and she consumed the nutrient packs he smuggled in his pockets. At night, the dynamic shifted. The room became a sovereign territory, where 2 refugees from 2 different wars tried to exist without killing each other. "Eat," Rhett said, tossing her a foil-wrapped bar. "Chicken and vegetable flavor. Or so the package claims. I think it tastes like sadness and sawdust." Ceres caught it out of the air without looking. "Your species has mastered space travel, but failed at basic nutrition. It is a paradox." "We focus on the big picture," Rhett quipped. "Now about the sleeping arrangements. You will take the bed tonight." "No," Ceres argued immediately. "The floor provides a better tactical vantage point. The bed is too soft. It dulls the reflexes." "The floor is cold metal, Ceres, and I am not letting a wounded guest sleep on rivets while I lay on a mattress. I have a code of hospitality." "And I have a code of endurance." "Fine." Rhett stood up, grabbing his pillow. "Then we both sleep on the floor. Let us see whose back gives out first. My money is on the human with the bad lumbar support." Ceres stared at him, her slit pupils dilating in amusement. "You are a stubborn creature," Rhett called her. "I am an engineer. Stubbornness is 80% of the job description." She sighed, a sound that was more of a chuffing breath. "Take the bed, human. I will take the mattress. We will compromise." "Deal." The suspicion did not vanish overnight. For the first 4 days, Ceres watched Rhett with the intensity of a hawk circling a field mouse. She watched his hands when he mixed her pain medication. She watched the door when he entered and exited, calculating if he was signaling security. She was waiting for the betrayal. She had been trained to expect it. "Why are you here?" she asked on the fifth night. They were sitting on the floor, eating freeze-dried peaches. The lights were dimmed to a low amber, simulating the twilight of a Valari evening. Rhett had hacked the lighting controls to make her comfortable. "I work here," Rhett said. "No," Saris shook her head. "Why are you here on the edge of the void? You fix machines with a precision that suggests you designed them, not just maintain them. You speak with the cadence of the core worlds, yet you live in a metal box on a dust moon. You are hiding." Rhett chewed a peach slice slowly. He looked at the woman who was supposed to be his enemy. In the dim light, the irises of her eyes were like molten gold. "We are both hiding, Saris," he replied. "I am hiding from capture. What are you hiding from?" Rhett put the food down. He drew his knees up, wrapping his arms around them. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating. He had never told anyone, not Priest, not his ex-wife, not the therapist the military had offered after the war. "Do you know the silence of Sector 4? He asked quietly. Saris went rigid. Her ears flattened against her skull. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. "The massacre," she hissed. "The grid malfunction that vaporized 3 Valari colony ships. 4,000 souls, burned in a heartbeat." "It was not a malfunction," Rhett said. His voice was hollow, scraped clean of emotion. "It was a feature." Saris stared at him, her hand slowly moving toward the heavy metal lamp on the floor. A weapon of opportunity. "I wrote the code," Rhett continued, looking at the wall, not at her. "I was the architect. It was supposed to be a shield, a kinetic redistribution grid. If a ship fired on us, the grid would catch the energy and disperse it harmlessly into the void. It was meant to stop the war." He laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "But the generals wanted a sword, not a shield. They took my harmonic algorithms and inverted the phase. Instead of dispersing energy, the grid amplified it. When your ships entered the sector, the grid did not block them. It resonated with their drive cores and turned them into novas." Rhett turned his head and looked her in the eye. He saw the rage there, the ancient genetic hatred of the Valari for the faceless demons who had burned their kin. He did not look away. He accepted it. "I did not know they changed the code until I saw the news feeds," Rhett whispered. "I saw the ships burn. I saw the casualty count. 4,312. I resigned the next morning. I deleted my archives. I came here to the one place where the technology is so old, my code cannot touch it." He waited for the blow. He waited for her to snap his neck. It would be justice. Saris did not move. Her hand hovered over the lamp, trembling. Her chest heaved as she processed the confession. "You built a wall," she said, her voice tight, "and they pushed it over onto us." "I handed them the bricks," Rhett said. "I am just as guilty." Saris slowly pulled her hand back. She slumped against the side of the bunk, the anger draining out of her, replaced by a profound, weary sadness. "I was on the Ethelgard," she said. "The flagship of the Third Fleet. We were ordered to intercept the grid. We were told it was a bluff." "You were there?" Rhett asked, horror washing over him. "I was a cadet. I watched the colony ships turn into stars. I watched the comms officers scream as their channels filled with fire." She looked at her hands. "My mother, the Empress, declared it a holy tragedy. She used the ashes of the dead to paint her war face. She used their deaths to fuel the recruitment drives. I became a battle daughter because of Sector 4. I was forged in the fire you lit." "Saris, do not apologize," she cut him off sharply. "Apologies are for spilled wine, not for genocide." She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the gray in his hair, the lines of exhaustion etched into his face, the way his shoulders carried the weight of invisible ghosts. "You ran away," she said. "You refused to build another one. You buried yourself here to ensure your mind could never be used again." "It is not enough," Rhett said. It is never enough, Saris agreed. But it is something. She reached out. It was a slow, deliberate movement. She placed her hand on his arm. Her skin was cool, her grip firm. I was bred to be a weapon, Rhett. From the moment I could walk, I was taught to end life. My mother looks at me and sees a sword. My government looks at me and sees a treaty leverage. I have never been a person. I have always been a function. She squeezed his arm. We are both tools that learn to hate the hands that hold us. That night, the wall between them crumbled. It did not disappear, but it became permeable. They were no longer just a human and an alien trapped in a room. They were two broken instruments discarded in the dark, finding comfort in the fact that they were not rusting alone. The days turned into a week, then 10 days. The routine solidified. The fear of discovery faded into the background, replaced by a domestic intimacy that was as terrifying as it was comforting. They watched movies. Rhett had a hard drive filled with Earth cinema from the last 2 centuries. They sat side by side on the floor, leaning against the bunk, watching a holographic projection on the opposite wall. This is illogical, Sarah stated, pointing a clawed finger at the hero on the screen. He is running down a hallway with automatic weapons fire on both sides. He is not wearing armor. He is shouting. Why is he shouting? It compromises his breathing regulation. Because he is the hero Saris, and he is passionate. He is trying to save his wife. He is going to die, she noted dryly. And his wife will be a widow because he did not utilize the cover provided by those structural pillars. It is called Die Hard for a reason. Just eat your popcorn. This corn is popped. She examined a kernel suspiciously. It is violent food, fitting for humans. They laughed. It was a sound that surprised them both. Rhett found himself looking for reasons to make her smile, to see the way her golden eyes crinkled at the corners, to hear the chuffing sound of Valari amusement. One evening, the atmospheric cycler in the cabin malfunctioned, dropping the temperature to a shivering 10 degrees. Rhett was buried under 3 blankets on the bed, shivering. Move over, Saris said from the darkness. What? You are vibrating. It is distracting. And I am cold. Valeri run hotter than humans, but my metabolism is slowing down to conserve energy. Before he could protest, she climbed into the narrow bunk. It was a purely practical decision. That was what Rhett told himself. It was survival, biology, thermodynamics. But when she settled beside him, her back to his chest, the heat radiating from her was intoxicating. She felt solid, real, and dangerous. He could feel the ridge of her spine, the powerful muscles of her back. Do not get any ideas, human, she mumbled, pulling his blanket over her shoulder. If you touch me inappropriately, I will break your finger. Understood, Rhett whispered, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her back. Strictly thermal exchange. Strictly thermal. They lay there in the dark, the only sound the rhythmic thrum of the station's reactor. Slowly, the tension leaked out of Rhett's muscles. He stopped shivering. Rhett, yeah. The silence, it was not your fault. The words were soft-spoken into the pillow. Rhett closed his eyes, fighting the sting of tears. Thank you, he whispered. He felt her hand find his in the darkness. Their fingers interlaced. It was not a sexual touch. It was an anchor. A promise that for this one night, in this one cold room, they were safe. The shift happened on night 12. The wind outside was howling a banshee scream that vibrated the hull plates. The solar storm was peaking. The cabin was bathed in the soft blue light of the emergency bacteria lamps. They were not watching a movie. They were just talking. Ceres was sitting on the desk, her legs dangling. Rhett was standing by the door. The conversation had drifted from politics to philosophy, and then to something more personal. My mother has arranged a union, Saris said, her voice flat. With High Warlord Vrax. He is powerful. He commands the 7th sector. A marriage would secure the border. He sounds charming, Rhett said, feeling a spike of irrational jealousy. He is a butcher, Saris spat. He believes peace is just a reloading phase. If I marry him, I will become the mother of the next war. My children will be raised to burn your worlds. She looked at Rhett. I ran. I took my interceptor and I flew into the storm because the probability of death in the nebula was preferable to the certainty of that life. Rhett walked over to her. He stopped a foot away. He wanted to reach out, but he held back. You do not have to go back to that, he said. I am a battle daughter. Duty is written in my genetic code. Screw the code, Rhett said fiercely. I rewrote my code. You can rewrite yours. Saris looked down at him. The distance between them felt charged thick with unspoken things. You make it sound simple. It is not simple, it is terrifying. But it is better than being a ghost in your own life. She slid off the desk. She was tall, eye level with him. The smell of cinnamon and ozone was overwhelming. Rhett, she breathed. She reached out and touched his face. Her fingertips traced the line of his jaw, the rough stubble. It was a touch of wonder, of exploration. I do not want to be a weapon tonight, she whispered. Then don't be, Rhett said. Just be Ceres. She leaned in. The kiss was tentative at first, a question asked in the dark. Rhett responded, his hands finding her waist, pulling her close. The contact was explosive. The 2 weeks of tension, of fear, of shared trauma ignited. She kissed him with the intensity of a warrior. There was hunger in it, a desperate need to connect, to feel something other than duty and guilt. Rhett kissed her back with everything he had hidden for 10 years. They stumbled toward the bed. Clothes were discarded, the gray t-shirt, the maintenance jumpsuit. Skin met skin, warm bronze against pale human flesh. It was not graceful. It was frantic and messy and real. It was the sound of breath hitching, of skin sliding on sheets of the ventilation fan, humming a steady rhythm. It was two people trying to crawl inside each other, to hide from the universe. In the aftermath, lying tangled in the sheets, Saris rested her head on his chest. Her ear pressed against his heart. Your heart beats too fast, she murmured. It is like a hummingbird. It is trying to keep up with you, Rhett said, stroking her hair. It was silky, surprising for someone so rugged. This changes things, she said. I know. We cannot stay in this room forever. I know that too. Rhett kissed the top of her head. But for tonight the door is locked. The universe can wait. The next evening, they snuck out. Rhett knew the patrol schedules by heart. He knew which sensors were glitchy and which corridors were empty during the gamma shift change. He led Saris, cloaked in a heavy technician's coat, with the hood up the service ladders to the old observation dome. It was a small blister of transparent steel on the top of the outpost, long abandoned, because the seals leaked slightly. They stood there, looking out at the desert. The twin moons were high, casting long, jagged shadows across the dunes. The sand glittered like diamond dust. It is beautiful, Saris admitted. Desolate, but beautiful. It is quiet, Rhett said. That is what I like about it. Saris leaned against the railing. The hood fell back, revealing her face to the starlight. She looked regal, ancient, and incredibly young all at once. When the comms come back, she said, staring at the moons, the Empress will find me. Her trackers are relentless. We could run, Rhett suggested. It was a fantasy, and they both knew it. Take the mule, head for the mining settlements in the south, and live in a cave hunted by both our species. She shook her head. No, that is not freedom. That is just a longer prison. She turned to him. I ran because I wanted a choice, but I realize now that running is not a choice. It is just reacting. Rhett looked at the vast emptiness of the desert. He thought about the silence. He thought about the years he spent fixing toilets and air filters, pretending he wasn't a genius who had broken the world. You know, Rhett said, his voice low, I learned one thing from all my mistakes. You cannot choose what the world does to you. You cannot choose the war you are born into. But you have the right to choose your battlefield. The cereal froze. She looked at him, her eyes widening. You have the right to choose your battlefield. The words seemed to resonate in the air between them. My battlefield, she whispered. If you go back, Rhett said, you do not go back as a victim. You go back as someone who chose to return. You choose where you stand. You choose who you fight for. Saris looked at him with a fierce intensity. And if I choose to fight for this, she gestured between them. Then we fight, Rhett said. Even if we lose, Saris smiled. It was a true smile, brilliant and sharp. I like those odds. She took his hand. Rhett called her. There is a phrase in my language, a tradition. We say it to those we leave behind when we march to the front lines. It is a goodbye. But it is more than that. It is a way to ensure the silence does not swallow us. Teach me, Rhett said. It is difficult for human tongues. I am a quick learner. Saris stepped closer. She placed her hands on his shoulders, her eyes locking onto his. Repeat after me, she instructed. Valshara Kor Aneth. Valshara Kor Aneth. Rhett stumbled through the syllables. Talvorith Unkai. Talvorith Unkai. She corrected his pronunciation, her fingers tapping his lips to shape the sounds. She made him say it again and again, until the alien words rolled off his tongue with a clumsy but sincere rhythm. What does it mean? Rhett asked after the 10th time. Saris hesitated. She looked at his mouth, then his eyes. There was a secret behind her gaze, a weight she was not sharing. It means, she lied smoothly, for the one I may not see again, I leave my spirit to guard your path. It was a beautiful lie. In reality, the Valshara Kor. The eternal war pledge, translated roughly to, I bind my blood to your blood, my death to your death. Where you stand, I stand. Your enemy is my target. Your heart is my command center. Until the stars burn out, we are one unit. It was the most sacred vow a Valari could make. It was usually reserved for soul-bonded mates entering a suicide mission together. By teaching it to him, by making him say it, she was binding him to her in the eyes of her gods and her law. It is a good goodbye, Rhett said, unaware he had just proposed marriage alliance and mutual destruction in a single sentence. Yes, Saris whispered, leaning her forehead against his. It is the only one that matters. The end came 2 days later. Rhett was in the control room when the static on the main comms board cleared. It vanished instantly, replaced by a crisp, terrified voice from the orbital traffic controller. Unidentified vessel, you are entering restricted coalition airspace. Identify yourself, a voice answered. It was not human. It was deep, resonating, and dripped with imperial authority. This is the dreadnought Iron Will. Escort to Her Imperial Majesty Empress Calith. We are tracking the transponder of a lost royal craft. Stand down or be vaporized. Commander Priest spilled his coffee. The control room erupted into chaos. Rhett did not wait. He sprinted. He ran through the corridors, his boots slamming against the metal grating. He burst into his cabin. Saris was already standing. She had heard the sonic boom of the ship entering the atmosphere. She was wearing her armor. She had repaired the plates with industrial adhesive and scavenged metal. It looked scarred and broken, but it was functional. She looked at Rhett. The domestic softness of the last 2 weeks was gone. She was the battle daughter again. They are here, she said. I know. Priest is wetting his pants in the command center. I have to go to the airlock. I have to surrender before they open fire on the outpost. My mother does not tolerate delays. I am coming with you, Rhett said. No. You stay here. If they see you with me. I am coming with you, Saris. I chose my battlefield, remember. She looked at him, torn between protecting him and needing him. Fine. But you stay behind the blast doors. They moved quickly. The corridors were flashing with red alert lights. Sirens wailed. They reached the main airlock, just as the docking clamps of a Volari shuttle engaged with the station's hull. The sound was a deafening metallic screech. The inner airlock door hissed open. Outside on the docking tube, a squad of Volari Praetorians stood in formation. They were giants in black and gold armor, holding energy pikes. Ceres stepped forward. She held her helmet under her arm. She looked small against the backdrop of the soldiers, but she stood tall. She turned to Rhett. He was standing in the doorway, his chest heaving. "This is it," she said. "This is it," Rhett echoed. The reality of it was crushing him. She was leaving. She was going back to the Sharks. Ceres grabbed his hand. She squeezed it hard enough to bruise. "Rhett," she said urgently. "Say it. Say the words." Rhett looked at the soldiers, then back at her. He ignored the fear. He looked into her golden eyes. "Valshara kor aneth tal, voreth unkai." He said it out loud. He said it like he meant it. The Praetorians flinched. One of them actually dropped his pike. They stared at the human mechanic in shock. Ceres smiled. It was a fierce, triumphant smile. "Tal voreth unkai," she repeated. She yanked him forward. Before he could react, she kissed him. It was not a gentle goodbye kiss. It was a claim. It was deep and hard and desperate. She kissed him in front of her royal guard, in front of the security cameras, in front of the universe. Then, she shoved him back. "Stay alive, human," she commanded. She turned and walked onto the shuttle. The blast doors slammed shut, sealing her away. Rhett stood there, touching his lips. The taste of cinnamon was still there. "You too, warrior," he whispered to the closed door. 3 months passed. Time on Halcyon was measured in filter changes and dust storms. For Rhett, it was measured in silence. The cabin was empty. He had moved the mattress back to the bed, but he slept on the left side, leaving a space for a ghost. The smell of her was fading, replaced by the sterile scent of ozone. He went through the motions. He fixed the water reclaimer. He calibrated the sensors. He wrote his reports. Priest had questioned him about the incident, but the Volari had wiped the station's logs as part of their departure protocols. There was no record of Ceres being there, except in Rhett's head. He found himself talking to her sometimes. "Look at that sunset, Ceres. You would hate it. Too much orange. That movie was terrible, you were right." He was lonely, but it was a different kind of loneliness. Before, he had been hollow. Now he was full of something that hurt, a sharp, aching longing. He was not hiding anymore. He was waiting. He checked the long-range scanners every day. He monitored the news feeds. The truce was holding barely. There were rumors of a political upheaval in the Volari capital. Rumors that the Empress's daughter had returned with strange ideas. Then, on a Tuesday, the sky fell. Rhett was on the surface repairing a solar array when the shadow fell over him. It was massive. It blocked out both moons. He looked up. A ship the size of a city was descending through the clouds. It was not a shuttle. It was not a cruiser. It was the Sovereign, the personal flagship of the Empress herself. It bristled with enough weaponry to crack the moon in half. "Calder," Priest screamed over the comms. "Calder, get back inside. They are hailing us. They are demanding landing coordinates." Rhett dropped his wrench. "I am on my way." By the time Rhett reached the main hangar bay, the entire crew of Halcyon was assembled in a trembling line. Priest was sweating through his dress uniform. The massive ramp of the flagship lowered. Steam hissed, and a carpet of red light projected onto the hangar floor. Hundreds of soldiers marched out. Then came the courtiers. And finally, carried on a gravity throne of floating obsidian, came Empress Calith. She was terrifying. She was 7 feet tall, clad in armor, made of white gold and bone. Her face was a mask of cold, imperious fury. Her eyes, the same golden eyes as Ceres, but harder, crueler, scanned the line of humans. Beside her, standing in simple ceremonial robes, was Ceres. She looked pale. She looked at Rhett, her eyes wide with warning. The Empress stepped off her throne. She walked toward the humans. The sound of her armored boots on the deck was like a hammer striking an anvil. She stopped in front of Commander Priest. Priest looked like he was about to faint. "Where is he?" the Empress demanded. Her voice was not a shout. It was a tectonic rumble. Who, your majesty?" Priest squeaked. The Empress ignored him. Her gaze swept down the line. It landed on Rhett. He was standing at the end, wearing his greasy jumpsuit, his hair a mess. She walked toward him. The soldiers parted like water. She stopped 2 feet from Rhett. She towered over him. She smelled of ozone and blood. She leaned down, her face inches from his. "So," she rumbled. "You are the mechanic." Rhett swallowed. He tried to stand straight. "I am Rhett Calder." The Empress narrowed her eyes. She looked at Saris, then back at Rhett. "My daughter," the Empress said, her voice rising in volume until it echoed off the hangar walls, "has returned to me. She refused her betrothal. She refused her command. She claims she cannot marry Warlord Vrax because she is already bound." The hangar was dead silent. The Empress took a breath, and then she roared. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated maternal outrage mixed with baffled fury. "Why does my battle daughter sleep in your cabin, human?" The question hung in the air, vibrating with the threat of immediate orbital bombardment. Rhett looked at the Empress. He looked at Saris, who had her face buried in her hands. "Well," Rhett thought, his mind going blank with panic, "this is going to be a very difficult conversation." The silence in the conference room of Outpost Halcyon was heavy enough to crush a starship hull. Commander Priest was hyperventilating quietly in the corner, clutching a datapad as if it were a religious artifact. On one side of the metal table sat Rhett Calder, still wearing his grease-stained jumpsuit, looking like a man who had walked into a fusion reactor without shielding. On the other side sat Empress Calith, a monolith of white gold armor and terrifying maternal rage. Behind her stood 2 Praetorian guards, their energy pikes humming a low, threatening note. Beside her sat Saris, her head bowed, her hands resting on the table, looking neither at her mother nor at Rhett. "Explain," the Empress said. The word was not a request. It was a gravitational command. Rhett cleared his throat. It sounded like cracking dry twigs. "Your Majesty," Rhett began, his voice shaking only slightly. "With all due respect, I do not know what you are talking about. Sarah stayed in my cabin because she was wounded. I treated her. We watched movies. I slept on the floor, most of the time." The Empress narrowed her eyes. She tapped a clawed finger on the metal table. "You slept on the floor," she repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "And yet before she boarded the shuttle, she invoked the Valshara core. And you, human, completed the couplet." "I was just being polite," Rhett said desperately. "She said it was a traditional goodbye, a way to wish someone luck." Saris made a small noise, something between a cough and a wince. The Empress looked at her daughter. Then she looked back at Rhett. She raised her hand, and a small holographic projector on her wrist flared to life. A wall of text in the sharp, angular script of the Volari appeared in the air between them. "Translator," the Empress commanded. The hologram shifted into English. Rhett read the glowing blue letters, the Eternal War Pledge. Article 1. The Binding of Blood. The speaker ties their life force to the listener. If one bleeds, both bleed. Article 2. The Binding of Honor. The actions of the listener become the responsibility of the speaker. Shame is shared. Glory is shared. Article 3. The Binding of Death. Should one fall in battle, the other is oath-bound to avenge them or join them in the void. Conclusion. This vow supersedes all prior allegiances to state, crown, or kin. It is a marriage of souls, forged for the singularity of combat. Rhett read it twice. The blood drained from his face so fast he felt dizzy. "Is it a marriage?" Rhett whispered. "It is more than a marriage," the Empress corrected, her voice cold. "Marriage can be annulled. Political unions can be broken. The Valshara core is a biological and spiritual imperative. By reciting the response Tal Vorathun Kai, you accepted her soul into your keeping. You effectively told the entire Valari Dominion that you, a human mechanic, are now the primary custodian of the life of the battle daughter. Rhett looked at Saris. She finally looked up. Her golden eyes were filled with a complex mixture of guilt and defiance. You told me it meant good luck, Rhett said, his voice quiet. I said it was a way to ensure the silence did not swallow us, Saris replied steadily. I did not lie. I just omitted the legal ramifications. You omitted the part where I committed high treason against your mother and accidentally married you in front of a firing squad. It was necessary, Saris said, her chin lifting. I needed to know if you were brave enough to say the words without knowing the safety net. I needed to know if you trusted me. I trusted you with my coffee ration, Saris. That is a big deal for a human. The Empress slammed her hand on the table. The metal dented. Silence, she roared. The diplomatic implications are catastrophic. Half my High Council demands your execution for defiling a royal ritual. The other half is confused why a battle daughter would bind herself to a man who repairs waste disposal units. She leaned forward, her golden eyes boring into Rhett. Give me one reason why I should not space you right now and send Saris to a re-education monastery for 10 years. Before Rhett could answer, before he could even formulate a plea for his life, the room was bathed in flashing crimson light. The proximity alarm wailed a jagged tearing sound that cut through the tension. Report, the Empress barked, tapping her comms bead. A voice from the Iron Will, her flagship orbiting above, crackled through. Your Majesty, urgent distress signal. Priority Alpha, origin, the Lumen Spire station. Rhett sat up straighter. Lumen Spire, that is the neutral zone habitat. It is civilian, 3,000 souls, mixed species. Status, the Empress commanded. Critical failure in the radiation shielding array, the officer on the ship reported. The solar storm has shifted. A coronal mass ejection is inbound. The Spire's shields are fluctuating at 20%. If they fail, the station will be sterilized by hard radiation in less than 1 hour. The Empress stood up. The diplomatic crisis evaporated, replaced instantly by the cold calculus of a warlord. Prepare the shuttle, she ordered. We are moving the Iron Will to intercept. We can extend our shields to cover the station. Negative, Your Majesty, the officer replied. The debris field in the asteroid belt is too dense for a Dreadnought-class vessel. We cannot get close enough to extend a perimeter shield. They need an internal fix. The Empress paused. She looked at Saris. Then slowly, her gaze shifted to Rhett. You, she said. The dossier my intelligence officer compiled says you were an architect of energy grid systems before you decided to hide in a hole. Rhett swallowed. I was. Can you fix a radiation shield on a civilian station? If the core architecture is standard, yes. But I need to be there physically to bypass the safety locks. The Empress looked at him for a long moment. A cruel, pragmatic smile touched her lips. Then this is your trial, human. You claim you are not a parasite. You claim my daughter saw something of value in you. Prove it. She gestured to the guards. Bring him. We are going to Lumenspire. If he saves the station, we will discuss the validity of his marriage. If he fails, he dies with the civilians and I will be spared the paperwork of his execution. The shuttle ride to the Iron Will was silent. Rhett sat strapped into a restraint harness next to Saris. The gravity forces were immense as they broke orbit, but he barely felt them. His mind was racing. I am sorry, Saris whispered. The roar of the engines masked her voice from the guards. For which part? Rhett asked, staring straight ahead. The kidnapping, the secret marriage, or the fact that your mother is terrifying? For the deception, she said. I did not want to bind you to a death sentence. I wanted to bind you to a future. I thought if we survived, I could explain it later. Rhett turned his head. He looked at her profile, the sharp nose, the long ear, the strength in her jaw. He remembered the night in his cabin, the way she had looked at him when he told her she could choose her battlefield. "We are going to save the Spire," Rhett said firmly. "And then we are going to have a very long conversation about communication boundaries." Saris let out a breath that sounded like a laugh. "Agreed." They docked with the Iron Will. The interior of the Valeri dreadnought was a cathedral of war. Vaulted ceilings, black metal polished to a mirror shine, and the hum of a power core that sounded like a captive god. They did not stop for a tour. The Empress marched them straight to the bridge. "Display," she commanded. The main view screen, a massive wall of glass, showed the Lumen Spire. It was beautiful and terrifying. The station was a massive crystalline needle built into the hollowed-out carcass of a nickel-iron asteroid. It spun slowly in the void. Around it, the solar storm raged, clouds of angry violet and burning green gas lit from within by lightning the size of continents. The station's shield was a flickering bubble of amber light. Even from this distance, Rhett could see the gaps. Every time the solar wind hit a gap, the station's hull sparked. "Time to impact the main radiation wave," the Empress asked. 42 minutes, the tactical officer replied. "Get them to the station," the Empress ordered. "Take my personal assault craft. It is fast enough to navigate the debris field." She turned to Rhett. She placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. Her armor was cold. "Do not mistake this for mercy," Rhett called her. "This is efficiency. My daughter has bound her honor to you. If you are incompetent, her honor is tarnished. I will not allow that. You will succeed because the alternative is that I erase your entire lineage from history." "I work better under pressure," Rhett lied. "Let us go." The flight to the Lumen Spire was a blur of evasive maneuvers. Saris piloted the assault craft, her hands flying over the controls with a speed that human pilots could never match. They weaved through the asteroid belt, dodging tumbling rocks the size of office buildings. Rhett sat in the co-pilot seat, studying the schematics of the station on his datapad. "This does not make sense," he muttered. "What?" Saris asked, banking the ship hard to the left to avoid a collision. "The power draw. The Spire is a civilian station. It should be running a standard Type 4 deflector. But look at these energy spikes. The core is pulsing like a weapon. It is drawing power from the main reactor and cycling it through a compression loop before feeding the shields." Saris glanced at the data. "That is a firing sequence. Why would a civilian station have a firing sequence?" Rhett felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He recognized the compression ratio. He recognized the oscillation frequency. "Because it is not a civilian shield," he whispered. "It is a retrofitted military grid. It is my grid." Saris looked at him sharply. The silence. "Yes. Someone took the code from the silence of Sector 4, stripped out the targeting protocols, and tried to use the raw energy output to create a super-heavy shield. It is like trying to use a flamethrower to warm a nursery. If it destabilizes, it won't just fail. It will detonate." They docked at the Spire's emergency airlock. The station was in chaos. Civilians, humans, Valeri, and a dozen other species were running through the corridors, dragging luggage and children toward the hardened shelters in the station's core. A station administrator, a harried-looking human woman with a bleeding cut on her forehead, met them. "Thank God!" she gasped. "The Valeri sent help. Wait, you are human." "I am the engineer," Rhett said, pushing past her. "Take me to the core, now." They ran. Saris took point, her armor, drawing stares and gasps. She moved with authority, clearing a path through the panicked crowd. "Clear the corridor!" she shouted in English and Valeri. "Move to the lower levels, emergency protocols are in effect." They reached the central engineering deck. It was a cavernous room, dominated by the core, a massive pulsating column of blue light that extended up through the ceiling. The air was hot and smelled of ozone and burning plastic. Three technicians were huddled around a console shouting at each other. "Get away from there!" Rhett yelled. He shoved a surprised technician aside and typed a command into the terminal. The screen flooded with red error messages. "It is in a cascade loop," Rhett said, his fingers flying across the keys. "The system is trying to build a charge for a weapon discharge, but because the targeting array is gone, it has nowhere to dump the energy. It is feeding it back into the shield generator, which is overloading the emitters." "Can you vent it?" Saris asked, standing guard at the door, as the station shook violently. "If I vent it, the shield drops completely for 3 minutes. The radiation wave hits at 12. We would cook everyone alive." Rhett stared at the code, scrolling down the screen. It was his handwriting. He knew every line, every subroutine. He saw the elegant logic he had written 10 years ago now, twisted and mutilated into this Frankenstein monster. He had a choice. Option A. He could write a patch. He could bypass the compression loop and force the energy into the shield. It would hold. It would save the station. But the weapon architecture would remain. The core would still be a bomb waiting for a trigger. Someone else could come along in a year, flip a switch, and turn Lumenspire into a Death Star. Option B. He could gut it. He could delete the entire weapon logic. He could tear the silence out of the system by the roots. But to do that, while the system was live, he would have to manually balance the energy flow while deleting the operating system. If his hand slipped, if his timing was off by a millisecond, the core would go critical and vaporize the station instantly. "Rhett," Saris said. She was looking at him. She saw the hesitation. "What is it?" "I can fix it fast," Rhett said, his voice trembling. "But it stays a weapon. Or I can destroy the code. I can unmake the silence, but if I miss a keystroke, we all die." Saris walked over to him. The station shook again, sparks raining down from the ceiling. She put her hand over his hand on the console. "You chose your battlefield," she said softly. "You said you wanted to stop burying people. If you leave this as a weapon, you are just delaying the next funeral." Rhett looked at her. He looked at the technicians huddled in the corner, terrified. He looked at the red light of the solar storm outside the viewport. "Okay," Rhett said. "Okay. We are doing it the hard way." He cracked his knuckles. "Doctor," he yelled at the lead technician. "I need you to manually cycle the coolant pumps on my mark. Do not wait for the computer. Just pull the lever." "Are you crazy?" the technician screamed. "That will blow the manifold. Do it or we are all dust," Rhett roared. He turned back to the screen. He brought up the source code, the root directory, Project Silence. "Goodbye, you bastard," Rhett whispered. He hit delete. The station screamed. It was a mechanical shriek as the core realized its brain was being lobotomized. The lights died. The gravity fluctuated, throwing everyone to the floor. "Coolant now," Rhett shouted, holding onto the console with one hand and typing with the other. The technician pulled the lever. Steam blasted into the room, blinding and hot. Rhett did not see. He was in the zone. He was surfing the energy wave. He was rewriting the flow protocols in real time. He was taking the aggression out of the system. He was telling the energy not to gather, not to strike, but to flow. To protect. Delete targeting subroutine. Delete harmonic resonance. Delete overload capacity. The code fought him. It was designed to resist tampering. Firewalls slammed down. Rhett smashed through them with override keys he had kept in his head for a decade. "Warning!" the computer voice droned. "Core stability at 10%. Critical mass imminent." "Rhett!" Saris yelled. She was at the door, firing her pulse rifle at a piece of falling debris that was about to crush a group of civilians. "We are out of time." Almost. The radiation wave hit the station. The impact was like a physical hammer. The whole world tilted sideways. Rhett was thrown against the console, his ribs cracking against the metal edge. He tasted blood, but his hands kept moving. He had one line left, the primary command line, the soul of the weapon. He typed, "Redefine function, civilian grid, priority, sustain." He hit enter. For a second, nothing happened. The darkness was absolute. The heat was unbearable. Rhett closed his eyes, waiting for the fire to consume him. Then a sound. It was not a scream. It was a hum. A low, musical, harmonious hum. The lights flickered on. But they were not the harsh red of the emergency alert. They were blue. A soft, steady, calming blue. Rhett opened his eyes. The core was no longer a pulsating, angry violet. It was a steady column of sapphire light. It flowed smoothly, quietly, feeding power to the shields with a gentle efficiency that was beautiful to behold. Outside the viewport, the radiation storm was hammering against the station, but the shield held. It was not flickering anymore. It was a solid wall of blue energy deflecting death harmlessly into the void. Rhett slumped against the console, sliding down to the floor. He gasped for air, clutching his ribs. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the hum of the core. Saris dropped her rifle. She walked through the steam, her armor clinking softly. She knelt beside him. She took off her helmet, her hair matted with sweat. "You did it," she whispered. "I killed it," Rhett wheezed, a bloody smile touching his lips. "I finally killed it. The silence is gone. It is just a light bulb now. A really big light bulb," Saris laughed. She pulled him into a hug, burying her face in his neck. He groaned in pain, but he hugged her back. Around them, the technicians and civilians began to stand up. They looked at the blue core, then at the human, and the Volari embracing on the floor. Slowly, the applause started. It began with one person, then spread until the engineering deck was filled with cheering. The Iron Will docked with the Spire an hour later. Empress Kalith walked onto the engineering deck. Her armor was pristine. Her face was unreadable. She walked through the crowd, who parted in terrified awe. She stopped in front of the core. She looked at the blue light. She looked at the readouts on the console, which showed a purely defensive energy grid, with zero offensive capability. She turned to Rhett. He was sitting on a crate, a medical drone, knitting his broken ribs back together. Saris stood beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You destroyed the weapon architecture," the Empress stated. "I did," Rhett said. "That system was worth 3 billion credits. It could have been salvaged. It could have been sold to the Dominion." "It was flawed," Rhett said, looking her in the eye. "It was designed to kill. I redesigned it to live. Now this station has a shield that will last for 100 years, and it can never be used to hurt anyone. Not by you, not by the humans, not by anyone." The Empress stared at him. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Rhett waited for the execution order. He had just destroyed a potential military asset of the Empire. Then the Empress did something impossible. She nodded. "Good," she said. Rhett blinked. "Good. A weapon that can be turned against its master is a liability," the Empress said. "You removed the liability. You showed wisdom, not just skill. You sacrifice power for stability. That is rare, among both our species." She looked at Saris. "Your choice of battlefield was unorthodox, daughter. But your choice of ally appears to be sound." Saris bowed her head slightly. "Thank you, Mother." "Do not get comfortable," the Empress warned. "The Council is still calling for blood. But now, I have a shield to hold them back." Later, in the station's main medical bay, Rhett and Saris sat on adjacent biobeds. The adrenaline had crashed, leaving them both exhausted. They were being scanned for radiation exposure. "You have 3 fractured ribs, a concussion, and moderate radiation sickness," the Volari doctor said, checking a holographic chart. He was a tall, thin male with silver eyes. "You will live human, but you need rest." "I plan on sleeping for a week," Rhett mumbled. "Ideally on a mattress this time." The doctor moved to Saris. He ran the scanner over her abdomen. He paused. He frowned. He ran the scanner again. He looked at Saris. Then he looked at Rhett. Then he looked back at the scanner. His ears twitched in a sign of extreme surprise. "Is there a problem?" Saris asked, leaning up on her elbows. "Is it the radiation?" The doctor hesitated. He looked at the Empress's guards standing at the door. He lowered his voice. "No, my lady. The radiation exposure is minimal. Your bio-armor protected you well. However," he tapped the screen, "there is an anomaly in your hormone levels, and a secondary biosignature reading." "Speak plainly, doctor," Saris said, irritated. "I am too tired for riddles." The doctor looked at Rhett, then back to Saris. There was a look of profound complication in his eyes. "It is not an injury, my lady. It is development. I will need to run more comprehensive tests to be certain, but the initial markers are undeniable." Saris stared at him blankly. Rhett, half asleep, frowned. "Secondary biosignature?" Rhett asked. "Like a parasite?" The doctor looked at Rhett with a dry expression. "In a manner of speaking, though usually we call them offspring." The room went silent. The hum of the medical equipment seemed to roar. Saris went rigid. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach. She looked at Rhett. Her eyes were wide, the golden irises trembling. "Offspring," she whispered. "Impossible," Rhett said, sitting up and immediately regretting it as his ribs protested. "It has been 2 weeks, and we are different species. The biological compatibility is statistically 0. "Statistically," the doctor corrected, "it is 0.001%. It seems, Mr. Calder, that you have defied the odds twice today." The doctor cleared the screen before the guards could see it. "I will list this as metabolic fluctuation for the official report," the doctor whispered. "But you two need to figure out what you are going to do. Because the Empress might have forgiven the marriage, but a hybrid child, that is not a scandal. That is a revolution." Rhett looked at Saris. She was looking at him with a terrifying mixture of fear and wonder. They had survived the crash. They had survived the lie. They had survived the solar storm and the bomb. But as Rhett looked at the flat stomach of the alien warrior he had accidentally married, he realized the real adventure was just starting. And this time, there was no code he could write to fix it. The crisis had passed, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the screaming alarms. Lumenspire was no longer shaking. The air scrubbers were humming a steady rhythmic tune, and the gravity plating had stopped fluctuating. Rhett stood on the high gantry of the engineering deck, looking down at his creation. It wasn't a weapon anymore. The core, once a throbbing violet heart of destruction, was now a column of sapphire light. It flowed like liquid glass, branching out into thousands of smaller conduits that fed the station. It was powering the hydroponic farms in Sector 4, the medbays in Sector 2, and the residential heating units in the lower levels. For 10 years, Rhett had looked at his own code and seen ghosts. He had seen burning ships and vacuum-frozen bodies. Now he looked at the blue light and saw nothing. Just light. Just energy doing what energy was supposed to do, keep the darkness away. "It is quieter," he said to himself, leaning on the railing. "Boring. I like boring things." Below him on the main concourse, life was returning to normal. He saw a group of children, human, and Valeri chasing a maintenance drone. They were laughing. The sound drifted up to the gantry, thin and sweet. He felt a strange sensation in his chest. It wasn't pride exactly. Pride felt too heavy. This felt lighter. It felt like taking off a backpack he hadn't realized he was wearing. Enjoying the view, Rhett turned. Saris was walking toward him along the catwalk. She had shed her heavy battle armor, wearing a simple gray tunic and trousers provided by the station's quartermaster. She looked smaller, without the plating, less like a monument to war, and more like a person. But her face was pale. The golden fire in her eyes was dimmed, replaced by a clouded, turbulent look that Rhett instantly recognized. "Hey," Rhett said, straightening up. "You okay? The doctor said the radiation exposure was minimal." Sarah stopped a few feet away. She gripped the railing, her knuckles turning white. She looked down at the blue core, then out at the children playing below. The radiation is not the problem, she said. Her voice was tight, strained. Then what is, did the Empress threaten to spacing us again, because I am pretty sure I filled my quota for death threats for the fiscal year. Saris didn't smile. She didn't even look at him. She just kept staring at the light. Rhett, she said. We need to talk, not here, somewhere private. They found a spot in the Arboretum. It was a new addition to the station, a massive dome filled with bioluminescent flora from a dozen worlds. The plants were glowing softly in the simulated twilight blue ferns trees, with leaves like silver coins and vines that pulsed with a gentle amber light. It was empty, save for a few maintenance bots trimming the hedges. They sat on a stone bench beneath a weeping willow that dripped glowing teal sap. Okay, Rhett said, sitting forward, his elbows on his knees. You are scaring me, Saris. You have that look. The one you had when you told me about the marriage to Warlord Vrax. Saris took a deep breath. She looked at her hands, which were resting on her stomach. It was a subconscious gesture, one she seemed to catch herself doing, and quickly stopped. The doctor spoke to me again, she began, after you fell asleep in the medbay. And he confirmed the anomaly, Rhett frowned. The parasite. Look, if you have a tapeworm, we can just... It is not a parasite, Rhett, Saris cut him off. She turned to him, her eyes fierce and terrified. It is a life form. It has a heartbeat. 2 heartbeats, actually. One primary, one auxiliary. That is a Valeri trait, Rhett froze. The Arboretum seemed to tilt on its axis. The hum of the ventilation fans dropped away. You mean, Rhett started, his voice failing him. You mean pregnant? Yes. But the doctor said the odds were... The odds were non-existent, Saris said. But the energy surge from the core, the doctor thinks the unique resonance of your grid combined with the solar storm might have acted as a catalyst. It accelerated cellular bonding. It bridged the genetic gap. She looked away, her voice dropping to a whisper. I am pregnant, Rhett, and it is yours. Rhett sat back against the stone bench. He felt like he had been punched in the gut harder than when he cracked his ribs. Pregnant. He looked at Saris. She was a warrior, a battle daughter. She was royalty. She was the heir to a legacy of bloodshed and honor. And now, she was carrying a child that shouldn't exist. A child that was half human, half him. The implications crashed down on him like an avalanche. The Empress, the Council, the human coalition. If they find out, Rhett whispered, they will tear you apart. The purists on your side will call it an abomination. They will say you polluted the royal bloodline. I know, Saris said. And the politicians on your side, they will see a specimen, a lab rat. They will want to dissect it to see how Valeri DNA interacts with human physiology. She stood up and began to pace her boots, clicking on the stone path. I have 2 choices, she said, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. I can break Valshara Core. I can tell my mother the bond was a mistake, a moment of madness. I can go back to the fleet. I can claim the child is the result of something else, a medical experiment. I can hide it. But if I do that, I lose you. And I raise this child in a cage of lies. She stopped and looked at him. Or I keep the vow. I claim you. I claim the child. And I drag you into the center of the Valeri court. A place where assassination is considered a form of debate. You will be the target, Rhett. You will be the weak link they try to break to get to me. Rhett looked at her. He saw the fear in her eyes. Not fear for herself. She had faced death 100 times. It was fear for the unborn thing inside her. It was scary for him. He stood up. He walked over to a glowing fern and touched the leaves. They curled around his finger, warm and alive. I spent 10 years running, Rhett said quietly. I ran from the silence. I ran from my name. I lived in a box on a dust moon because I was terrified of being seen. I didn't want to be an architect anymore. I just wanted to be nobody. He turned to Saris. When I was deleting the code today, when I was tearing the weapon out of the core, I felt something break. It wasn't just the system. It was the fear. I realized that hiding didn't fix anything. It just let the wound rot. He walked over to her. He took her hands. They were cold. Saris, he said, do you remember what I told you on the observation deck about choosing your battlefield? Yes, she whispered. Well, I am choosing mine. He looked down at her stomach. It was flat, betraying nothing of the storm brewing inside. But Rhett could imagine it. A life. A bridge. A person who was both of them, and neither of them. I want to be there, Rhett said. His voice was steady, surprising even himself. When it opens its eyes, I want to see if it has your ears or my terrible hairline. I want to teach it how to fix a hydrospanner and how to say, don't shoot, in 12 languages. Saris's breath hitched. Rhett, you do not understand. The danger. I understand, he interrupted. I know they will hate us. I know it will be hard. But I am done running Saris. I am done hiding in cabins. If we are going to do this, we do it in the light. We do it out loud. He squeezed her hands. You said the Valshara core binds my death to yours. Well, it binds my life to yours too. And to this. Saris stared at him. Tears welled up in her golden eyes, spilling over onto her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. She just looked at him like he was the only solid thing in a dissolving universe. You are a fool, Rhett called her, she choked out. I am an engineer, he corrected gently. We build things. And I think we just started building the most important thing I have ever worked on. They sat there for a long time. The night cycle of the arboretum deepened, the biolights pulsing slower. They talked. They didn't talk with the witty banter they used to hide behind. They talked with raw, terrifying honesty. We will have to live on the spire for a while, Saris said. My mother won't let us leave. She will want to keep the child under observation. The spire is nice, Rhett said. Good air filters. I checked. And the coffee is marginally better than Halcyon. We will have to teach it both languages, Saris mused. But Valeri syntax is difficult for young minds. We should start early. Fine. You teach it poetry and war chants. I will teach it math and how to swear at inanimate objects when they don't work. It will need a name, Saris said. Let us wait on the name, Rhett smiled. Let us just call it the project for now. Keep it professional. Saris laughed. It was a wet, shaky sound, but it was real. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I was so afraid, she admitted. I thought you would want to run. I thought you would see this as another trap, another weapon you made by mistake. Rhett kissed the top of her head. He smelled the cinnamon scent of her hair. It is not a weapon, Saris. It is a chance. It is the only thing in this galaxy that isn't a weapon. The decision was made, but the execution was the hard part. The Iron Will was preparing to break orbit. The Empress was expecting a report. She was expecting Rhett to go back to his dust moon, and Saris to return to her duties perhaps, with a slight reprimand for her dalliance. They walked back to the command deck, hand in hand. The station corridors were quiet. The panic had subsided, replaced by the exhausted relief of survival. They passed a group of engineers who were inspecting a conduit. The engineers stopped and nodded at Rhett. One of them gave him a thumbs up. Rhett nodded back. It felt strange. Respect. He hadn't felt that in a decade. They reached the airlock where the Empress's shuttle waited. The Praetorian guards were there, statues of black metal. They crossed their pikes as Rhett and Saris approached. The Empress awaits, the lead guard rumbled. We know, Saris said. Her voice was steel again. The vulnerability of the garden was gone, replaced by the regal armor of the battle daughter. But her hand gripping Rhett's was warm. They boarded the shuttle. The flight up to the flagship was silent. Rhett looked out the viewport at the spire. It glowed in the darkness, a beacon of blue light against the starfield. My work, he thought. My home. He looked at Saris. My family. The word felt huge. It felt dangerous. They landed in the hangar bay of the Iron Will. The ramp lowered. The reception committee was smaller this time. Just the Empress, her High Council, 3 ancient Valeri, with skin like parchment, and a few high-ranking generals. They stood on the polished black deck. The Empress sat on her gravity throne looking bored. "Report," she said as they approached. "Is the station secure?" "The station is secure, Mother," Sarah said. She stopped 10 paces from the throne. She didn't bow. "And the mechanic," the Empress glanced at Rhett. "Has he been adequately compensated for his services? A few thousand credits should suffice to buy him a new air filter, or whatever it is he desires." Rhett stepped forward. He felt the eyes of the generals on him. He felt the weight of the massive ship around him. "I do not want credits, Your Majesty," Rhett said. The Empress raised an eyebrow. "Oh, do you want a medal? A commendation, we can print one out. It means nothing but humans seem to like shiny objects." "I want sanctuary," Rhett said. The counselors murmured. A general scoffed. "Sanctuary?" the Empress asked. "From whom the coalition did you break a law, mechanic?" "From everyone," Sarah stepped in. She moved to stand shoulder to shoulder with Rhett. "We claim sanctuary under the law of life. We claim the protection of the blood." The room went dead silent. The law of life was an ancient, obscure statute. It was rarely invoked and usually only by high-ranking nobility to protect an heir during a succession crisis. The Empress sat up straight. Her golden eyes narrowed. She looked at Saris, really looked at her. She saw the way Saris stood. She saw the protective tilt of her body. She saw the hand resting hovering near her stomach. The Empress was many things. A warlord, a tyrant, a politician. But she was also a mother. And she was a Valari female with senses sharper than any scanner. She inhaled. She smelled the change in Saris's pheromones. Her eyes widened. The slit pupils dilated until her eyes were almost entirely black. "Clear the deck," the Empress whispered. "Your Majesty," a counselor asked. "Clear the deck," she roared. The sound shook the bulkheads. The generals and counselors scrambled. In 30 seconds, the massive hangar bay was empty, save for the Empress, her personal guards, Rhett, and Saris. The Empress descended from her throne. She floated down to the deck plates. She walked toward them. She looked like a storm cloud given form. "You dare," she hissed. "You dare stand there and tell me." "It is true," Saris said calmly. "I am pregnant." The Empress stopped. She looked at Rhett. She looked as if she wanted to vaporize him with her mind. "A hybrid," she spat the word like a curse. "A half-breed. Do you have any idea what you have done?" "You have not just broken a protocol, Saris. You have broken biology. You have created a political nuclear bomb." "I created a child," Saris said. "And he is not a bomb." "He—" The Empress laughed a harsh barking sound. "You do not even know what it is. It could be a monster. It could be a genetic dead end. It could die in a week. Or it could live," Rhett said. He stepped in front of Saris. It was a suicidal move, blocking a war empress from her target. "And if it lives, it is proof." "Proof of what?" the Empress sneered. "Of your incompetence at contraception." "Proof that we can coexist," Rhett said. "Proof that the war is actually over. You talk about treaties, Your Majesty. You talk about alliances. But those are just words on paper. They can be burned. This is blood. You cannot burn blood." The Empress stared at him. She looked at the human standing between her and her daughter. She saw the fear in him. He was shaking just a little, but she also saw the resolve. He wasn't moving. "You destroyed a weapon today, mechanic," the Empress said softly. "Do not think that buys you the right to destroy my dynasty." "I am not destroying it," Rhett said. "I am expanding it." The Empress looked at Saris. "And you? You choose this. You choose the shame, the ridicule. You choose to be the mother of curiosity. I choose to be the mother of the future, Sarah said. And I choose him. The Valshara core stands mother. We are bound. If you kill him, you kill me. If you exile him, you exile me. And you exile your grandchild. The silence stretched. It was agonizing. Rhett could hear his own heartbeat. The Empress looked at them. She looked at the defiant angle of Saris's chin. She looked at the stubborn set of Rhett's jaw. She saw herself, 40 years ago, standing before her own mother, refusing to kill a prisoner she had fallen in love with. She remembered the fire. She remembered the conviction. She sighed. It was a long, heavy sound like a deflating airlock. You are infuriating, the Empress grumbled. Both of you. She turned around and walked back to her throne. She sat down, rubbing her temples. I cannot hide this, she said. The Council has spies everywhere. The doctor has already filed a report, I am sure. We do not want to hide it, Sarah said. We want to announce it. Announce it! The Empress looked at her like she was insane. Yes, Rhett said. On the spire. Let the spire be the cradle. It is a neutral station. It is a place of peace. Let the child be born there, under the protection of both flags. The Empress tapped her claw on the armrest of her throne. She was calculating. She was running the simulations in her head. A hybrid child, born on a station, saved by a Valeri princess and a human architect. A station powered by a weapon turned into a shield. The narrative was chaotic. It was messy, but it was powerful. It was a story that could break the stalemate. It was a story that could marginalize the warmongers on both sides. See, even our biology can find a way to agree. Why can't you? The Empress looked at Rhett. You realize, she said, that if this child is born with two heads, I am blaming you. I can handle that, Rhett said. And you realize, she continued, that you will never have a private moment again. You will be symbols. You will be watched. You will be judged. We know, Sarah said. The Empress closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them. The anger was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. Very well, she said. We will play your game, but we play it by my rules. She stood up. The Iron will remain in orbit around Lumenspire. I will declare the station a royal protectorate. You will live there. You will serve as guardians of the station. And when the child is born, we will see if the universe is ready to accept a bridge or if it tries to burn it down. She walked over to them. She looked at Rhett. She reached out and poked him in the chest with a sharp, armored finger. Do not disappoint me, son-in-law, she growled. I have airlocks with your name on them. I will do my best, mother-in-law, Rhett said. Saris let out a breath she had been holding for an hour. She squeezed Rhett's hand. They had done it. They had survived the night of choice. The Empress turned and marched toward the exit. Come. We have a press conference to organize, and I need to terrify the Council into submission before breakfast. Rhett and Saris followed her. As they walked out of the hangar, back toward the shuttle that would take them to their new home, Rhett looked at Saris. You know, he whispered. I think she likes me, Saris smiled. She threatened to kill you 3 times in 5 minutes. That is practically affection. I will take it. They stepped onto the shuttle. Behind them, the massive engines of the dreadnought flared, not with the fire of war, but with the steady burn of protection. Below them, the Lumenspire spun in the dark, a jewel of blue light, waiting for its new guardians. And inside, Saris a tiny, impossible heartbeat, a rhythm that sounded like a drum roll for a new world. The grand audience chamber of the Iron Will was designed to make lesser beings feel small. The ceiling arched 100 meters overhead, supported by pillars of obsidian that seemed to drink the light. At the far end, on a raised dais, sat the throne of bone and gold, occupied by Empress Calith. Today, however, the chamber was not just a display of power. It was a courtroom. Rhett stood in the center of the polished black floor, Saris beside him. Behind them, the massive doors were guarded by Praetorians. To their left and right, floating on gravity discs, were the members of the High Council, Valeri elders, draped in heavy robes of crimson and violet, their faces masks of ancient judgment. "The accused stand before us," Caliph announced, her voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics until it resonated in the chest of every person present. "Not as prisoners, but as petitioners. They claim a bond that defies our laws. They claim a future that defies our history." She looked down at Saris. "Speak, daughter, and choose your words as if they were arrows. Once lost, they cannot be called back." Saris stepped forward. She wore no armor today. She wore the simple gray tunic of the Lumen Spire, a visual statement that she stood not as a warrior of the fleet, but as a citizen of the station she had helped save. "I stand here," Saris began, her voice clear and steady, "to confirm the Valshara Corps. The oath I swore to Rhett Calder was not coerced. It was not a trick. It was a choice." A murmur ran through the council. Elder Malik, a scarred veteran with one eye, leaned forward on his disc. "A choice," Malik rasped. "To bind your soul to a human mechanic, to a species that burned our kin in Sector 4. "To a man," Saris corrected sharply. "Not a species. To the man who saved my life when protocol demanded he leave me to die. To the man who destroyed his own creation to save 3,000 souls on the Spire." She took a breath, glancing at Rhett. He gave her a small, imperceptible nod. "And," Saris continued, her hand moving to rest on her stomach, "I stand here to announce that this bond has already borne fruit. I carry a child of two bloodlines." The silence that followed was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a vacuum before the hull breaches. Then the explosion came. "Abomination!" Elder Malik roared, slamming his fist on his disc. "She admits to polluting the royal line. This is treason. This is biological heresy." "It is a miracle," countered Counselor Veda, a younger diplomat known for her fascination with human culture. "A hybrid, it suggests a compatibility we never dreamed of." "It suggests a mistake," another shouted. "Separation is required. The fetus must be extracted and studied. The bond must be severed." "He is a spy. She is a traitor." The voices overlapped, a cacophony of outrage and fear. The counselors argued with each other, shouting across the chamber, their gravity discs drifting closer together, like battleships maneuvering for a broadside. Rhett felt the sweat trickling down his back. He had expected anger. He hadn't expected this level of visceral, chaotic noise. He looked at the Empress. Caliph sat on her throne, unmoving. She watched the chaos with eyes of cold gold. She let them scream. She let them vent their fury until the noise reached a crescendo. Then she raised one finger. The Praetorian guards stamped the butts of their energy pikes onto the deck plates. Boom. The sound was like a thunderclap. The council fell silent instantly. "Are you finished?" the Empress asked. Her voice was dangerously soft. "Are you quite done acting like a pack of starved jackals fighting over a scrap of meat?" She stood up. She walked down the steps of the dais, her white gold armor clinking softly. She walked past the counselors, ignoring them, until she stood directly in front of Rhett and Saris. She looked at Rhett. Then she looked at Saris. "You think I am surprised," Caliph said. It wasn't a question. "I think you are angry," Saris said. "I am always angry," Caliph replied dryly. "It is part of the job description. But surprised, no." She turned to the council, her cape swirling around her. "Do you think I sent my daughter to the Halcyon sector by accident?" The counselors exchanged confused glances. Rhett frowned. "Halcyon," the Empress continued, pacing the floor, "is a graveyard of ambition. It is where the human coalition sends the officers it wants to forget. But my intelligence reports told me something interesting 3 years ago. They told me that the architect of the Sector 4 silence, The man who wrote the code that killed 4,000 of our people had buried himself there. Rhett went cold. She knew. She had always known. I wanted to kill him, Calith admitted, looking at Rhett. I wanted to send a stealth team to slit his throat while he slept. It would have been justice. Why didn't you? Rhett asked, his voice hoarse. Because I read the rest of the file, Calith said. My spies recovered fragments of your original code. The code before the generals twisted it. I saw the safeguards you wrote. I saw the logic gates designed to protect civilian transports. I saw the conscience in math. She stopped pacing and looked at her daughter. And then I looked at you, Saris. You were becoming hard, cold. You were the perfect battle daughter, and it terrified me. I saw you turning into me, a weapon with a crown. The Empress sighed a sound that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 campaigns. So, she said, I arranged a patrol route. I arranged a navigational error that would put your interceptor near Halcyon during the solar storm season. I did not plan the crash, of course, that was just your terrible piloting, Saris. But I knew if you were in trouble near that moon, only one man had the skills and the proximity to help. You set us up, Saris whispered, her eyes wide. You used me as bait. I used you as a litmus test, Calith corrected. I wanted to see what the architect would do when a wounded enemy fell into his lap. Would he finish the job, or would he prove that the conscience I saw in his code was real? She gestured to the two of them standing together. I expected him to save you. I expected perhaps a grudging respect to form. I did not expect, she glared at Rhett, a secret marriage and a hybrid grandchild in 2 weeks. You two are remarkably efficient. We aim to please, Rhett muttered, earning a sharp elbow in the ribs from Saris. The Empress turned back to the council. Her face hardened. You call this bond a crime. I call it a bridge. We have been at war for 50 years. We have bled until our worlds are dry. And what do we have to show for it? Graveyards and rust, she pointed at Rhett. This human destroyed his own legacy to save our people on the Spire. He took the weapon that killed our kin and turned it into a shield that protects them. If that is not atonement, then there is no such thing, she pointed at Saris. And my daughter has chosen to build a life instead of taking them. She carries a child that shares the blood of both sides. A child that by its very existence proves that our biology is not as incompatible as our politics. Elder Malik sputtered. But, Empress, the purity of the line tradition. Tradition, Calith snapped, is just peer pressure from dead people. If tradition demands we keep killing each other until the stars burn out, then tradition is wrong. She walked back up the dais and sat on her throne. She looked down at the assembly with absolute authority. Here is my judgment. The room held its breath. Rhett Calder is not a prisoner. He is a witness. He is living proof that a weapon can be unmade. He is pardoned for his crimes of creation on the condition that he dedicates the rest of his life to preservation. Rhett let out a breath he felt like he had been holding since the crash. The Lumen Spire, Calith continued, is hereby declared a sanctuary station. It will be a joint protectorate of the Valari Dominion and the Human Coalition. I have already sent the treaty drafts to the Human High Command. They will sign, because if they don't, I will remind them that I have their best engineer and their most embarrassing secrets. She looked at Saris and Rhett. You two are appointed as the guardian pair of the Spire. Your duty is to maintain the shield, protect the populace, and ensure that the technology there is never ever weaponized again. We accept, Saris said instantly. I have further decrees, the Empress announced. Effective immediately, a joint oversight council will be formed for all Class A weapon systems. Engineers and warriors from both species will review the code. No more secret weapons. No more accidental genocides. If a gun is built, both sides must know where it points. She paused, a small, wry smile touching her lips. And regarding the Valshara Corps, she looked at Rhett, her eyes twinkling with amusement. It is hereby decreed that any binding ritual involving a non-Valeri participant must be preceded by a full verbal translation and a mandatory cooling-off period of 24 hours. We will not have any more accidental marriages, because a human thought he was saying, "Good luck." Laughter rippled through the younger members of the council. Even Malik looked like he was fighting a smirk. "As for the child," Caliph said, her voice softening, "it is not an abomination. It is a keystone. It will be born on the spire. It will grow up under the shield its father built, and the protection its mother provides. It will speak both tongues. It will know both histories." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Let it be known this child is under the personal protection of the War Empress. Anyone who seeks to harm it, or use it as a political pawn, will find that my retirement is indefinitely postponed." She sat back. "So speaks Caliph. So it is ruled." The Praetorians slammed their pikes again. Boom. The judgment was final. The transition was not easy. Revolution never is. In the months that followed, Lumen Spire became the busiest port in the sector. It was a curiosity, a symbol, and a construction site all at once. Rhett found himself leading a team of engineers that looked like the start of a bad joke. 20 humans, 15 Valeri, and a handful of AI drones, all trying to figure out how to retrofit ancient weapon platforms into civilian infrastructure. "No, no, no," Rhett argued with a Valeri technician named Kalen. "You cannot use the plasma conduit for the sewage recycling. It runs too hot. You will boil the waste and the whole station will smell like boiled waste." "But the efficiency rating is higher," Kalen argued, his ears twitching in annoyance. "I do not care about efficiency. I care about not living in a steam sauna of poop. Route it through the secondary cooling loop." "Fine," Kalen grumbled. "Humans and their delicate olfactory senses." Rhett wiped his forehead. He was tired, but it was good. It was the tiredness of building, not hiding. Saris had her own battles. She was managing the station's security, integrating the Valeri guards with the human private contractors. It was a nightmare of ego management and cultural translation. "Do not bare your teeth when you smile at the human guards," Saris instructed, a young Praetorian. "They interpret it as aggression." "But I am happy," the guard protested. "Then use your words. Say, 'I am happy.' Keep your lips over your fangs. Try it." "I am happy." The guard looked like he was in pain. "Better," Saris sighed. "We will work on it." But amidst the chaos, they found their rhythm. They had an apartment in the upper levels overlooking the Arboretum. It was filled with Rhett's datapads and Saris's meditation crystals. It was messy. It was loud. It was home. Rhett stopped looking over his shoulder. He stopped waiting for the silence to catch up with him. He realized that the ghosts of Sector 4 hadn't vanished, but they had stepped back. They were watching him now, not to haunt him, but to see what he would do next. And then 7 months after the crash, the real test began. Rhett was in the middle of a meeting with the human ambassador when his comms bead chirped. "Rhett!" Saris's voice was tight, breathless. "It is time." Rhett stood up so fast he knocked his chair over. "Ambassador," he said, sprinting for the door. "We will have to discuss the trade tariffs later. My wife is invading the medbay." The birth was not the calm, sterile procedure the doctors had promised. It was a battle. Saris refused the sedatives. She wanted to feel it. She wanted to be present. Rhett held her hand. He squeezed it until his fingers went numb. He whispered the words of the Valshara core to her, over and over like a mantra. "Talvorth and Kai. Talvorth and Kai." "You are doing great," he whispered, wiping sweat from her forehead. "You are the strongest person I know. You fought a solar storm. This is easy." "You are a liar," Rhett called her. Saris gasped, crushing his hand. "This is significantly harder than the storm." And then a cry. It was a high, thin sound. A sound of pure, indignant life. The doctor, the same one who had diagnosed the parasite, held up a small, wriggling bundle. "It is a boy," the doctor announced, sounding genuinely awed. Rhett looked. The baby was small. He had pale skin that shimmered slightly with an iridescent sheen under the lights. He had a tuft of black hair, and when he opened his eyes, blinking against the harsh glare, they were not brown, and they were not gold. They were a swirling mix of both, a nebula of hazel and amber. Rhett felt his knees give out. He slumped against the bed. "He is okay," Rhett asked, his voice cracking. 10 fingers, 10 toes. "He appears to be perfect," the doctor said. "Though his ears are adorably pointed." Saris reached out. "Give him to me." She took the baby. She held him against her chest. The baby stopped crying, instantly soothed by the familiar rhythm of her dual heartbeats. Saris looked down at him. The warrior mask was gone completely. Her face was soft open, radiant with a love so fierce it made the air in the room feel charged. "Hello," she whispered in Valeri. "Hello, little bridge." Rhett leaned in. He touched the baby's tiny hand. The fingers curled around his thumb. The grip was strong. Surprisingly strong. "Hi there," Rhett whispered. "Welcome to the spire. I am your dad. I built the roof 5 years later." Lumen Spire was no longer just a station. It was a city. The population had tripled. Ships from both the Dominion and the Coalition docked daily, trading goods, stories, and culture. The blue light of the shield was a beacon in the sector, a lighthouse guiding travelers through the dark. On the observation balcony of the Guardian's residence, a party was in full swing. It was a chaotic mix of species. Valeri diplomats were trying to eat canapes with dignity. Human engineers were explaining the rules of poker to confused Praetorians. Laughter and music filled the air. Rhett stood by the railing, a glass of synthetic wine in his hand. He had a few more gray hairs now, and the lines around his eyes were deeper, but he looked younger. The weight was gone. "You look smug," a voice said. Saris joined him. She was wearing a dress of deep midnight blue, her hair braided with silver wire. She looked breathtaking. "I am not smug," Rhett said. "I am content. There is a difference." "Is there?" She smirked, leaning against him. 60% difference, he quipped. "Papa Mama." A blur of motion shot across the balcony. A 5-year-old boy, fast as lightning, slammed into Rhett's legs. "Whoa, easy there, Turbo," Rhett laughed, scooping the boy up. Elian Calder Calith was a force of nature. He had his mother's energy and his father's curiosity. His pointed ears twitched with excitement as he pointed at the stars. "Look," Elian shouted, switching effortlessly between languages. "Vera ship, big ship." Rhett looked. A cruiser was docking. "Yes, that is a Valari cruiser," Rhett said. "Probably bringing more of your grandmother's furniture. We are going to run out of room soon." "Grandma said she is coming to visit," Elian exclaimed. "She said she is going to teach me how to use a Katarn." "A plasma lance," Saris corrected smoothly. "And she is absolutely not doing that until you are at least 10. "Ah," Elian pouted. "But I want to poke things." "You can poke your vegetables," Rhett said. "With a fork." Elian wriggled free and ran off to harass a tolerant Praetorian guard, babbling in a mix of English and Valeri about the structural integrity of his toy spaceship. Rhett watched him go. "He confuses the languages sometimes," Rhett said. "He called the toaster a thermal enemy yesterday." "He is not wrong," Saris laughed. "That toaster is aggressive." She rested her head on Rhett's shoulder. They looked out at the station they had built, at the people living, working, and arguing in peace under the blue light. "Do you ever miss it?" Saris asked quietly. The quiet, the cabin, just us against the universe. Rhett thought about it. He thought about the silence of the desert, the fear, the desperate intimacy of two people hiding in the dark. "No," Rhett said. "That was survival. This is living." He put his arm around her waist. "Besides," he added, "I chose my battlefield, and I am winning." Saris smiled. She looked at their son, who was now trying to climb the leg of the guard. She looked at the stars, which no longer looked like cold, distant fires, but like destinations. "We are winning," she corrected. The camera of history pulls back. It rises above the balcony, above the laughter and the music. It pulls back to show the lumen spire, a glowing jewel, spinning in the vast, indifferent void. It is small against the darkness, but it is bright, it is steady, and it is growing. Around it, the rusted hulks of old warships are being towed away, melted down to build new bridges. The silence of the grave has been replaced by the noise of life. And in the center of it all, a family stands together. Not hiding, not running, just standing, free.